Well, again, we're going to get started. Everyone out there, my name is Nyanza. I am president of the John M. Langston Bar Association. We are so excited to present this program tonight, along with the Black Women Lawyers Association of Los Angeles Incorporated, on behalf of our BWO's current president, Michelle Kazadi, and the incoming president, Lisa McLean. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that their installation is actually coming up October 30th. You can go to blackwomenlawyersla.org to get more information about their installation. And again, it's a great pleasure for Langston to kind of partner with our sister organization, especially on this event, considering Awakening and what the book is about. So again, I'm really excited about the conversation. The other thing I wanted to mention that we want to thank Ramona, which is this awesome little wine spritzer, women-owned wine spritzer company
Female-owned,
that has been supporting you on your book tour.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
We're not sipping on anything yet for various reasons. We want to stay focused, but we definitely want to give them a shout out for supporting you and supporting us.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. So I want to be clear in introducing Ms. Areva because, you know, she has so many accolades and is so well respected, and I don't want to leave anything out. And along with, you know, these professional accomplishments, it's a great honor for us to have her here because she's actually a 2016 Advocate for Justice Langston honoree. She was honored at our 2016 installation, so she's a friend of Langston. Along with that, again, many of you know her. She is an award-winning civil rights attorney, a Harvard Law School graduate, a talk show host, and entrepreneur. She is a CNN legal analyst, and she has been in many shows, including Dr. Phil, The Doctors, Good Morning America, World News Tonight, Special Report. I know, you know, Face the Nation. You've pretty much done every show.
I work a lot.
You work a lot, but more importantly, you have an important voice. So it's great that you're out there and getting it out because you're speaking on so many important topics. So it's not just about the work, but it's the work. So we appreciate that. Beyond that, also Areva has her own LA-based firm, Martin & Martin LLP. And I know another thing that's very important and special to your heart is the Special Needs Network, which focuses on autism. Yes, absolutely. Again, she's a national best-selling author, and tonight we're going to be discussing her fourth book, Awakening. Again, welcome, Areva Martin.
Thank you for that. Well, thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad you mentioned that I was a Langston honoree recipient. I have fond memories of being at that event and, you know, receiving that award. I'm really grateful to Langston, grateful to Black Women's Lawyers and, you know, both organizations for hosting me tonight. I feel like I'm with friends and family, so it's always good to do that. And yes, a big shout out to Ramona. Ramona is a female-owned spirits company, and they're very few. So I'm super proud that they have chosen my book tour. I'll be traveling to New York and St. Louis and some other cities. And they are sending their incredible products. And I just encourage everyone to check them out as we support other female-owned entrepreneurs and business owners. So super excited to be here tonight to talk about my fourth book. You know, writing a book is always a journey. You hope people will read it. You hope they will like it. And I'm just happy so far the reviews have been incredible. So just really glad to be here in conversation with you.
Excellent. Yes, I've heard that we're already getting great reviews. The book just, I guess, dropped about a couple of weeks ago, right? We were on pre-orders. It's actually out now, available on arevamartin.com, but also Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc. Correct?
Well, it's available for pre-order. As
okay,
you said,
still
the
pre-order.
actual pub date, it actually drops at the bookstores on Tuesday, October 26th.
Okay, so in a couple weeks, so get your pre-order in now. I know some of you pre-ordered and registering for this event, so we appreciate it. But again, we want to make sure and support you. And I'm looking forward to getting my copy. I did pre-order mine on Amazon, so I should be getting it right on time because, you know, Amazon don't mess around with deliveries.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to start with that. Kind of what was your motivation in this time and space for the book?
Yeah, it was really driven by, in some ways, being locked down because of COVID. As all of us had to experience this new thing called quarantines, called, you know, don't go out the house, called work from home. I found myself, like a lot of folks early on, watching a lot of Netflix and eating a lot of potato chips and drinking wine while I was eating those potato chips. And one day I said, you know, you should probably take advantage of this time and do something more productive. First of all, because it's not going to end anytime soon. Because originally, I think like a lot of people, I thought, we'd be home for a couple of weeks and we go back to our regular lives. And once I realized that it wasn't happening as quickly as we thought, and what was happening in the world. I mean, this is at the same time, lockdown started around March. George Floyd is murdered May 25th. We saw, the country erupt. We saw, worldwide protests. And I was doing my job as a part of that, talking a lot on TV about what George Floyd's murder meant, what these high profile cases of police brutality meant. And, then that conversation evolved to structural racism and how structural racism was really at the root of what we were witnessing as it relates to George Floyd and the trial of, the ultimate indictment and then trial of these officers, trial of the one officer. And it just got me thinking about, structures and how structures have played a role, not just in oppressing people of color, African Americans in particular, but women. And the similarities between the conversations and what was happening and the conversations we were having around structural racism also applied to structural sexism and gender bias. So I draw from a lot of those conversations and looking at the systems. And, for so long, Naya, women were told, and particularly, 10 years ago, so there was a really popular book, and we were told to lean in. And in many ways, leaning in meant do more, take on more assignments at work, stay at work later, make yourself more available. And for a lot of women, that message was really disheartening because
it put more of the onus of us to take responsibility for how the system was treating us.
And guess what? We were already working hard.
We're already
doing like 1,200 jobs. And that became more evident during COVID when many of us had to go home and become, teachers and principals and, in addition to our jobs as breadwinners. So I wanted to correct the message on that. And I wanted women to know that they were enough and that it wasn't what we were doing, it's what the system wasn't. And I have this quoted in the book that says, you can't lean into a closed door. So it doesn't matter how hard we work, if the door is locked shut, then, our work in some ways is in vain. And not to say that women haven't made progress, because we can, point to just a plethora of women who have made significant strides in business and in politics. But the reality is those numbers aren't enough. And I wanted to reveal, that this was about more than women working harder. And it was about us needing to look more carefully at the systems that were preventing us from achieving our best lives and, the opportunities that we should have.
Well, again, kudos to you, because I did not write a book during the pandemic. So even thinking about that in that structure, though, I know part of the book is you also incorporate stories from other women who have been faced with different challenges, and you talk about this idea of the 5 lies. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things when I wanted to be honest, we were in this moment where everybody was just, we were just being honest about everything, the history that had been mistaught to us, the things that we had not been told about our history. And so I said, well, let's be honest about what women have been told. And I thought about growing up, what were the things that were told to me over and over again that I internalized? And how did how did those things impact me? And were they true? And one of the first lies that I reveal in the book is that, hard work is enough. I grew up in the Midwest with just some amazing women, my grandmother, my godmother, and they weren't very well educated. They didn't have a lot of money. They had a lot of grit, they had a lot of heart. And they told me, as many Black people have been told, and we still tell our kids, many of us, you have to work harder, be twice as good, show up earlier, stay later. And that's an important lesson. And I pride myself on having an incredible work ethic. But I soon realized when I got to places like Harvard and I got to corporate firms that my hard work wasn't ever going to match that white guy sitting next to me whose father played golf with the partner. So I could get to that law firm at 8 in the morning and stay 12 at midnight, but I didn't have anyone in my family who was on the golf course or who had those kind of relationships that were going to make a difference in my career in the same way that a lot of my male counterparts did, particularly, white men counterparts. And so I just feel like telling women to work hard without telling us the whole picture, is a lie. So, and I try to tell my kids that, work hard, but realize there's some things that may be working against you that you aren't aware of. So that was one of the things that I wanted to reveal in the book. And that's the first lie, because that was such a message that was just ingrained in me over and over and over again.
And part of that, right, we internalize that and we think we're still not being enough, or we're still not doing enough, when we really are. We are working twice as hard. And so we have to be realistic about all of these other factors that do affect it.
Yes.
And so even going into that, I know there's some times, obviously we have plenty of examples, but I know there's some specific examples that you talk about in your own challenges coming up, like you said, at Harvard, or first going into corporate America, and what that looked like for you to get past some of these lies.
Yeah, one of the things that really impacted me was, like, so when I got to a corporate law firm out of law school, just kind of looking around and realizing that at the time I was coming into corporate firms, women were graduating at the same rate, if not higher, than men from law school. But when I looked at who were in the leadership roles in those firms, it didn't reflect, the math didn't make sense. We're graduating at the same rate, if not higher. We're going into law firms. We have the credentials. We have the same thing in theory. The same. We're carrying
on
the same
paper. We have the same credentials.
The men have
Exactly,
the same credentials. But when you looked at the leadership in those firms, we weren't there. And not only were we not there, you start to learn that we were getting, kind of off that train really early on, sometimes after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years. So we weren't even making it, to that point where there was that consideration. And that was a problem. So, I had to ask myself, well, wait a minute, I did all the right things. I went to Harvard, I graduated top of my class. I got a, great job at a firm. You're not going to outwork me. I know you're not smarter than me. So what's happening here? So, and it started to bother me. It bothered me tremendously, as it should all women, because we weren't being valued. And implicit in that message is your work is not as valuable as the work of the man that's next to you, that's coming into that firm at the same time. Those men who were able, who were on a different trajectory. You saw them as partners, you saw them as managing partners, you saw them as, lead counsel, but you didn't see that happening for women in the same numbers.
And I think that's part of this awakening concept, right? Being awake to these ideas of the things that we're facing, et cetera. But even within that, I think that there is a role for men to be allies, or men to be sponsors, or that kind of concept. How do we lean into that?
Yeah, and I talk a lot about that. I talk about allies, and allies are important. Men are still in control in a lot of these firms in corporate America. So we're not going to dismantle this structure, these systems, without their assistance. And so I talk about the difference between a man being a partner and being an ally. And I make the distinction between someone being passive and saying, yeah, that's good. I'm glad to see you doing that. Yeah, I support the Me Too movement. Oh, yeah, I support women. Oh, yeah, my mom or my
in
sister.
words, but not action.
And not action. They say it, and they think that by saying it, that they are acting in our best interest. But then when you see them in these meetings, you see them in positions where they can take action to elevate a woman or to promote a woman, they sit there and they sit very quietly. And so, I do a lot of diversity training, and I talk to men often. I said, well, wait a minute, you're investing in your daughter. Men, break out their phone, show you their daughter, tell you, they go to Yale, they go to USC, they go to UC, whatever. They're so proud of their daughters. But I'm like, okay, but you're in a job where you have the opportunity to make it, create opportunities for other women. Are you doing that? Because if you're not doing that, guess what? Your daughter is going to end up in that same position, and some man that looks just like you is going to prevent your daughter from making the kind of progress that you want. So, I try to get men to understand, on a visceral level, that this is personal for them. And a lot of men, and this isn't about men bashing, but I give this example in a book. My brother, he and I have this business venture together, and we were being mentored by an older white guy. And after a couple of times with Zoom mentor sessions that we were doing, I said, Robbie, are you noticing that this guy, even though I'm the lead on this project, he never calls my name, he never acknowledges me, he never gives me any compliment for any of the input that I offer during these meetings. But throughout this meeting, he calls your name, he says, great idea, right? Oh, that's an excellent point. I mean, he's just great point. And he basically ignores me. I'm invisible to him, which oftentimes women are. And my brother blew it off. oh, you're imagining, oh, that, there you go again. That's what men say often, some of them. And I said, no, I'm serious about this. I want you to pay attention to it. And so the next time we had one of these meetings, after the meeting, I said, okay, now what did you see? Did I make that up? Or was that guy so dismissive of me, and so crediting to you? And he says, well, he had to acknowledge it. And then he went into, but he didn't mean it. I'm like, well, okay,
Yeah.
well, what do you mean he didn't mean it? Well, he's not, unless he's an imbecile and we shouldn't be taking advice from him as a mentor. He absolutely positively did mean it. It happened every time we were in those meetings. But even my brother, who, loves me, was oblivious to that. And that happens. And I tell that story. And when I tell it to men, I've had so many men say, yeah, that's happened to my wife. Like, my wife is an executive and we'll be in a meeting and I'll notice even, my guy friends ignore her. So, as successful as women are, here we are still having to insert ourselves into conversations. And I literally had to say it again, hello, hi, he works for me, right? I'm the boss here. I pay his check, I pay his salary, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Because they were like two guys chopping it up. And, I was just kind of in the way, really. And I told my brother, I said, we got two choices here. Either I'm gonna confront him, or I'm not coming back to the meetings. You choose. I said, this is a business deal. I don't want to mess it up, but I'm not going to sit there and let him continue to insult me. I said, it's not going to do it.
I think that reminds me of an example, and it happens in all corporate America with women, but I think even especially in law firms, unfortunately, is this idea that, going back to doing all this work and et cetera, and assuming for women that they're going to notice it and then acknowledge it or reward it or et cetera. But you really do have to be vocal in those situations, because whether or not it's intentional, which we can talk about the system of implicitness in it. But, this idea that it's like, okay, you're not just going to recognize it. So I do need to point it out. I do need to say it, and being kind of, comfortable in your own voice to be able to do that, I think.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because in my third book, Make It Rain, I write a whole chapter about how women are nurtured, and we're nurtured to in different ways than men are, raised typically. And men, beat their chests, they pick the trash up off the floor, and it's
then
like
they announce it.
it's an announcement, it's a press release, and it's the whole, press
I did
conference.
something.
And we win the $1 million case, and we just go back to our office and put that case down and pick up the next case, and just go to the next one. And if no one says anything, nothing gets said. And we get, again, as you said, we just think somebody's going to acknowledge it. And when it comes time for a raise or promotion or partnership or whatever, we think everyone saw, the work that we did, not recognizing that oftentimes it hasn't been seen, and it hasn't been recognized. And then we are kind of surprised when we're not rewarded for that effort. And so I talk to women about, hey, get comfortable talking about yourself. It is okay. And all those things you may have been told about, don't brag, forget it.
By the way, that's probably in my head because I read Make It Rain. I remember having your book tour at USC and having being a witness to that conversation.
Yeah.
But I know that in this book, you talk about the Mike Pence rule. And again, that's another conversation that I have, especially with lawyers, right? Because female lawyers don't get invited to drinks with the guys or to golf with the guys in the same way because of this idea of the Mike Pence rule that I'd like you to discuss.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people were applauding him. Oh, he's so virtuous.
Yeah.
He won't go to a meeting without his wife. He won't travel without his wife. Oh, what a great guy he is. And again, not recognizing, implicit in that is he can't even be trusted to go into a room with a woman other than his wife and act in a professional way. And we're applauding that. That's not to be applauded. That is to be criticized, challenged.
And in any circumstance, because I should be able to go and golf with some male lawyers and not assume that any of them are going to be inappropriate, but have those access to those conversations that help us move forward because they get to know us, they know better about what we're doing. We can talk about the things that we've been working on. and sometimes we're not allowed in that space because of that kind of position.
Yeah, so it prevents us from being in those important rooms and in those social gatherings where these deals oftentimes are being made,
Yeah.
particularly you're talking about developing business, if you're in a corporate setting, and you need to be on that golf course with that CEO, that CFO, because they are making those business decisions. But yet this pious guy is like, well, I don't want any, women there that are not my wife, or I don't want any women there that are not with their husbands. And that's another thing that happens to
Oh,
women.
yeah, that's very denigrating. As well.
You
It's on
can't
the
show up.
surface.
Are you bringing your husband? Well, no, my husband's busy. You ain't got a life. And people used to ask me that all the time. Where's your husband? At home.
He has his own life.
Yeah, he's busy. Shit to do. What are you running around chasing me? No. Some kids at home. He's at home with those children.
Yeah.
His children. But that's not, there's something, and it's got to the point where I would tease him. I say, people think we're divorced because they don't see you, or either somehow I'm mistreating you or something is wrong, not recognizing that you can have your life, I have mine, we have ours together. But no one would, challenge a man who's at a business meeting without his spouse.
Absolutely.
That is common, that's accepted. So, and these things are subtle, but they are so ingrained in our culture. And, I wanted to call them out, and I wanted them to stop. I wanted them not to be so subtle, and really to, peel the onion back, pull the veil off and have these conversations about it.
Yeah, because it is so ingrained in the structure, so ingrained in the system, et cetera, where it's like, let's make sure and be aware of them. Let's start talking about them, which the book is doing. So I appreciate that, but again, it's where we're at, that we, last summer when everybody was, talking about different issues, for you to be able to say, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is very directly relative to every place else that we don't have a voice. So let's talk about it.
And there's so many of those places, particularly
so many of those
if you are a
places.
woman of color. And what we're seeing too, think about what's happening with the workplace now, this whole exit that we're seeing, where people are just wholesale leaving their jobs, saying they're not coming back to work. And in many instances, these are women, and they're demanding a different workplace. COVID has caused people to reflect, to think about what's important to them. Many people have decided that, chasing a particular position or chasing a particular salary isn't as important as they once thought it was. And I think it's going to force employers to have to, from one, raise pay. People who are being paid just, abysmally low wages. Employers are having to, raise wages. They're having to rethink the work environment and how they make that work environment more inviting and more attractive to bring people back to work. And I think it's a wonderful thing we're going through.
And I think that also is an opportunity for some women to say, this is how I want to work. This is what I want my job to look like and feel like, and I can perform in this space. And so I know in the book, again, we've kind of identified some of the issues, but you do talk and give some insight about things and how young women can kind of face some of these things and address them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that I wanted to do is obviously reveal some of these uncomfortable conversations that I don't think we're having nearly enough. And let's start to have them, but also talk about how you deal on so it's the micro level, as these things happen to you in the workplace, and then on a macro level, what we can do collectively, because we owe it to that next generation of women to try to open these doors, open the doors further. The door has been cracked in some way, but how wide can we open that door? How many of these myths can we debunk? How much of this system can we start to change so that, we're not looking at women Black women in particular, being the most educated, demographic in this country, but yet when you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, there are like 3 Black women. So, again, the math just doesn't work out. We're told, go to college, get an education, get a degree, go beyond college, get a second degree. And Black women have done that. They told us to do it, and we did it. We did it in record numbers. Yeah. And then again, you look at our progress across some of these areas, and we're still lagging in so many ways. And so you have to ask, why is that? Again, it's not us. Don't tell us to work harder. We've done that. We've done that historically, traditionally. We will do that. Don't tell us to get more education. We did that. So all the things, all the barriers, all the bars that have been set, we
We
exceed.
keep meeting and
We
exceeding.
meet and exceed the bar, and they keep moving the goalposts. So hopefully, getting men as in particular to start thinking about some of these issues as well, and what they can do in their own environments. And sometimes men will ask, well, they feel powerless, but they don't recognize, even in a meeting, just having a man sometimes, oh, wait a minute, she was talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey guys, she had the floor, because those simple microaggressions that happen every day in a workplace. Your idea, I don't know. Then Bob says the same thing. Wow, that's brilliant. Wow, I should,
Yeah.
And that happens. So Bob saying, well, you know what? She just said that. Let's give her credit. I mean, those are small things, but those are things that you can control, right? So let's start doing those things that we can control.
And so what advice do you have specifically for women in those situations? I think, you're an entrepreneur as well. I think we're also, I guess, the largest number of new entrepreneurs in the country. And so on the entrepreneur space and the professional space, we're still hitting those marks. But if we're getting pushback, what type of advice can you give to someone?
Well, sometimes it's about challenging. And, for a lot of women, some of the women that I interviewed, one woman in particular, Kristen, she has she's a Stanford MBA.
Wow.
And she is, done okay in her career, but a lot of the guys that she went to school with, that she graduated with from Stanford, are now CEOs and CFOs and, have huge jobs, huge responsibility. And she looked back as I was doing the interview, on how many times she was told to train a guy, how many times she was told, it's not your turn, wait your turn, this opportunity is for this guy, and how she didn't challenge it. So, either she said she left a job, or she just quietly did what was expected of her, or did what she was told. And she said she regrets that. So one of the things I tell young women is, think twice before you are so passive in those situations. And I think particularly for Black women, we're so afraid of getting that, aggressive, angry Black woman, label that can cause us in many situations to not stand up for ourselves, not speak up for ourselves. So, I tell my daughters, I tell younger women, get comfortable speaking up for yourself, get comfortable challenging, when you see, discriminatory conduct in the workplace. You may not win that battle, but just by challenging it, you're going to cause that company, that organization, in many instances, think about their policies, and you may be creating a better situation for somebody who comes behind you. You may not get that promotion, you may not get that raise, you may even get fired. But, just by you standing up, you can change things. And by you using using those examples to challenge the system.
And I don't think we realize how strong our voice can be. And it might even be that it's that one person at the meeting that has interrupted you, or, even some of those smaller steps when someone else can witness it can make a big change.
Oh, and we have seen so many people, like I'm thinking about Refinery 29. I don't know if you remember during the whole COVID period, they basically, the editor-in-chief, the founder of the organization, was forced to step down. Once this woman, and I had an opportunity to interview her on a show, had the courage to go onto Twitter, and this was after all these companies were posting these Black squares on their Instagram account, standing in solidarity with social justice causes. And she says, well, it's ironic that Refinery 29 is posting this Black square because internally the Black women are treated like crap. It's essentially, it's kind of paraphrasing what she said. And by her opening up that dialogue, I mean, women that work that just started, telling their stories. And, soon, and very soon, that the woman who was in charge, who was running this, that media company, was ultimately forced to step down. And just by that one person having the courage to tell her story. And we've seen that in so many instances, that the power of storytelling, right? One person comes forward, we've seen it in, our Kelly, most current example of that, the women coming forward and giving power
to the next person. And like you said, it might not be for you, but you're giving power, you're giving voice to the next person in that same situation, and they can use it and move it forward.
Yes, and in his case, obviously now we're looking at convictions for predatory conduct that happened over decades. But for some of those women having the courage to come forward and tell those stories, we still may be stepping in the name of love, which we ain't.
We don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. So let's shift about talking about some of the larger scale solutions that you discuss in your book, again, because we're talking about a systematic, structural kind of issue. So yes, on the, like you said, micro level, us speaking up more, us being a little more confident in our own voice. What about the larger solutions?
Yeah, some of the things I talk about are legislative changes, policy changes, and we see that kind of playing out now in this fight that's going on in Congress over this infrastructure bill. And one of the things that's being considered that, the question is he going to make it or not? Several of the things, the child tax credit, universal pre-K, paid leave, all of those things we know inure to the benefit of women. So we know when women have an opportunity to put their kids in free pre-K when the kids are 3 years old, that means that mother can go to work. She doesn't have to worry about paying for childcare. We know that child tax credit, brought, millions of children out of poverty. And again, gave women an opportunity to pay, basic bills like their rent and transportation and paid leave. That's one of the biggest things that prevents women from often advancing in the workplace, whether they're taking time off to care for children or sick parents, because that's something else that often falls on women as your parents start to age. So we used to talk a lot about this kind of sandwich generation where women particularly are caring for kids, school-age kids, and aging parents who may have health challenges, et cetera, and still trying to work. And what a lot of women do, they quit. They drop out of the workforce. They get, just talk about women being on the mommy track, and many of them leave the workforce. So if we're going to really make it conducive for women to stay in the workplace and to be on a trajectory so that they can achieve, some of these jobs, we've got to make it conducive. And one thing COVID has taught us, you can stay at home, right?
And get some things
and
done.
get a whole lot done. And this notion that somehow you have to choose between, do I go to work or do I care for my kids and stay home? We now have, put that lie to rest.
Absolutely.
And you think about for years how women with children, I think about my own kids, as I was raising my kids as they were younger, how many women were having to make that decision. And a lot of women just quit. They just quit their jobs. And, my son Marty, who's on the autism spectrum, particularly moms of special needs kids, because there's so many meetings and appointments and therapy appointments. And I've met so many women who had gone to school all their lives, become doctors, psychologists, engineers, whatever. And they get a kid who had special needs, and the husband is working, great, credit for that. But they would have to quit their jobs and give up on their career dreams and aspirations. And so now we know that, we didn't have to do that. We can work from home. We can be productive. We can manage our own schedules. We can, work when our kids are doing their schoolwork. We can work when they're, taking naps or whatever. So those are the kind of structural changes that, we seem to be getting close in some ways. We don't know what's going to happen with some of this legislation that's pending, but those would be huge benefits.
And I think too, with that type of legislation, then you're also addressing, because I think sometimes not only it is the woman taking on that responsibility, like you said, then I'm going to quit because I need to balance what I'm doing. But there's also an assumption by those men at the top that, oh, well, maybe I can't promote Areva because she doesn't have time, because I know she has this other issue. And they're making the assumption for us that we don't, well, we're not going to put that extra pressure on her because she is a mom and she has these other things. And it's like, no, give me the rules that I need so that I can take the time and still do that and balance it. And it is very interesting because I feel like a lot of this idea of having to be in the office is about this patriarchal thing, right? That the men like being out of the house.
Hello.
All the guys I know are like, oh, I want to go back to the office. Like, I want to be away from my wife and kids. And they want that structure. When meanwhile, we're like the best at juggling everything and can be more productive at home. So I think that is also going to be a challenge where we don't have the same socialization as in person to be able to be productive and also move up the ranks in this new world that we're going to be living in.
And companies are challenged now because they're trying to force people back into the office, and a lot of people are saying, no, I'm not coming back into the office. And the reasons, aren't bearing out. They can't cite productivity because companies, as we see, so many companies have had some of their best years.
Best years,
Best, most productive years ever, highest revenue years ever. So you can't say that, working from home has somehow, hurt productivity. And, one of the things I talk about in the book, One of the Lies, and I think every woman has been told this or had to grapple with this notion of, is it either or? Is it raising a family or
you
having
can't
a
have
successful
both.
family?
You can be a professional or you can be a
women
mom
can't
and
have
wife,
it all. You gotta choose. You gotta. And I know a lot of women, and I'm sure you do, who made the choice not to have children because they were afraid that if they took time off from work to have kids, they would be put on that mommy track. They wouldn't be seen, as that
as
reliable,
ambitious, as reliable, exactly.
as available, right?
Yeah,
Oh, can't send her on a business trip, to DC or New York or whatever because she has kids at home. Send Peter, send Bob, send Bill, and that's the biggest lie ever. And no man ever has been told, you should think about it. You gonna have kids or you gonna make partners?
Yeah.
Never,
Never.
ever, never. Or I can't send Bob because, he may have to take his kids to a medical appointment or a dental appointment or whatever. And just think about that. I mean, when you think about how unfair that is, I mean, it's just fundamentally
it's such a presumption and assumption that you're making those decisions for my life when we will figure it out, right?
Or make the structure such that we don't have to
We don't
worry.
have to,
Give me the paid leave time that I need, allow me to work from home, give me access to, universal pre-K or daycare or all of those things that will help me be able to be productive in a job, whether it's in an office, a traditional office, or whether it's at home. And that's what women have been asking for. Give us the tools. We'll get it done. It's just, we will get it done.
We'll definitely get it done.
Because we've been getting it done with our hands tied behind our backs and, weights on our feet.
We will always figure it out.
We've been getting it done under the most, difficult situations. So those are some of the structural things that I'm excited about, like I said, with this administration and a lot of women who are in Congress now, get this. A lot of men, have been very much involved in the push for some of these big wholesale, structural changes in the way people work.
And I think that's being vocal about that because I don't think everybody understands how that, those legislative matters do have those repercussions, right? Because they're like, oh, okay. They're not putting it together the same way that you're just voicing it, that it's like, if we have this, we can do this. It's all connected. All connected and important to us being our most productive selves and having the best opportunities.
And think about middle class and low, income women who literally, cannot work because they have kids at home and they make less money at their jobs than it costs to put their kids in daycare or to pay for the transportation or the after school care after school. So if those women literally could go out into the workforce and work, just think about how many other ailments in this country, how many other ills in this country we would solve in terms of poverty, in terms of cycles of poverty that continue to, again, plague primarily Black communities. So it can be done.
Tips then the education equity, the pay equity, all the other equities start to lean into that same thing. And that's what I'm talking about. All of those things are connected. Until we have conversations like this, I think women are kind of in it, but we don't see it in that same way. And more importantly, as we talked about earlier, men definitely don't make the connection. And so that's why the conversation is so important.
And women, because we've been socialized in this, patriarchal,
listen to the lies.
Listen to it.
We're bought into the lies.
Cisgender, normative, white, heteronormative, society. We've been talking a lot about, how white supremacy, how, that gaze, that lens that so many of our policies have been written through, so it's also about us too, being brave enough. And for me, like the whole work ethic piece, my godmother, my grandmother who raised me, I worship these women. And it was hard for me to, not acknowledge that they told me anything wrong. They told me what had been told to them.
Exactly.
Right? So you pass down what's been passed to you. But, Maya Angelou told us when you know better, you do better.
better.
So, but it's hard when you have to confront your past and what you've been told to really come to grips with, well, they love people wrong, or they were limited, right?
They were limited,
They were
and
limited.
also, again, especially in this space, we're in such a transitional time that certain things have to change because everything else is changing. So maybe you were not necessarily wrong in that time and space, but they're not seeing how the structures are changing, the education systems are changing, all of these things. As we're growing and changing, those rules don't apply anymore, or those rules don't work anymore.
Yeah, and we've got to, in real time.
In real time.
In real time.
We're doing like right now,
Right now,
we have to
yes.
deal with it in a different way and face it and say, okay, that's not true, even if it's not true anymore.
I'll give you this other example I use in the book. I had to go and get my known traveler number, to get through TSA.
You gotta get that pre-check number. I know you're traveling all the time. You definitely need pre-check.
Need my pre-check. Go online. What do you need? Social Security, driver's license, or photo ID. Go to the place. I get there. Got my driver's license. I got my, no, you don't need Social Security number. You need your birth certificate.
Oh, yeah.
You need your birth certificate and your photo ID. I get there. So my birth certificate, my maiden name is Bell. My name is Areva Bell. My driver's license, my name is Areva Martin. So the guy says, well, I can't use this. Where's your marriage license? I said, that's not on the instructions on your website. Why do you need my marriage license? Well, your birth certificate doesn't match your license. I said, well, do you need my husband? If he came in here, would you need his marriage license? He says, well, what's his name? So I told him. He says, well, no, we wouldn't need it. We just need it, primarily for women. After about 10 minutes, I was so exasperated with this guy. I go home, I tell my middle daughter, Morgan, I said, never change your name. She says, Mom, why? I'm like, I was so, and it was in that moment that the patriarchal structure yeah. And it was a small thing, but it was such a big thing. It was such a big thing. I've worked all my life.
Yeah.
And as a professional, I was Areva Bell. If you go look at my University of Chicago, my Harvard degree, it's Areva Bell. Areva Martin didn't go to Harvard.
Right.
Really, I just didn't. And I changed my name at a time when, women changed their names. Some hyphenated, but I told her, I said, I'm telling you now, do not, you're gonna regret it. I was so livid, I had to go find a freaking marriage license to get this.
Because your pre-check number.
And again, so I said, this is going in the book because these are the small structural things in our society where women are treated differently than men, and we accept, and everybody the guy sitting there was just as calm and cool. You're not getting that number, lady, without that right, without that right. And it just reminded me. So, once you start your awakening journey, you will be reminded of so many systems.
So many times.
It's
yes,
so
every
pervasive.
day. Yeah, every day, all day.
There's pervasive. And I don't want to exhaust you. I don't want you to feel exhausted at the end of the day, like you got to fight all of these systems, but we must. We just cannot give this earth over to our daughters and ask them still to have to walk into a Staples and show a marriage license.
And part of it is right. Part of it is our own awakening and paying attention to those things and not accepting that. Part of it is awakening of society and making sure our voice is loud, that they're awake to these things. So to that end, what can organizations, like Langston Bar, especially, professional organizations, Black women lawyers, how can we use our organizational voices in this space to awaken?
Great question. You're already doing it, first of all, thank you. And it's these conversations, when we were talking about dismantling systemic racism, we had all these diversity experts, anti-racist activists. They were going into big corporations, Google and Microsoft, and holding workshops on how to create an anti-racist environment in your workplace. And very important work and important conversations, and very emotional and painful conversations for a lot of people. Unfortunately, a lot of those conversations are starting to wane.
Yeah.
People feel like, okay, that was then, that moment has passed. People are slipping back into what's comfortable. but it's, using your platform, using your organizational structure to foster these kinds of conversations, and really helping younger women, in particular younger lawyers who are coming up into the profession, not just women, but men, understand the role that they play. We talk about this a lot, when you're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, and Me Too. It doesn't, I can't just talk to the men about sexual harassment, or nor can you just talk to the women. And in the same vein, I think organizations, have an obligation to bring people together. I was interviewing a woman who wrote a book, and the book has to do with, she hits a lot of things: colorism, race, liberation, justice. And she told me she was doing book club events. She had white book clubs that had invited her to speak, and she had Black book clubs. And I said, that's nice, but have you thought about getting these book clubs together? And because now you're gonna have a conversation about race, and white people are talking to each other, lost, and don't really,
and by the way, in the same way, like sometimes, during that time, I was very frustrated. Again, last summer, Black Lives Matter at the height of it, because you can be on social, but your circle is your circle. We all have the same frustration. So it's like my voice isn't going far enough.
Yes, if you're just talking to it's like an echo chamber, right? You're talking to the same people. And so likewise, this conversation, this is a conversation that is universal, is right and universal conversation. So I don't want to just have it with women. I want to have this conversation with men. I want men and women to have this conversation together. And organizations can facilitate that kind of, cross conversations, because oftentimes they're happening in silos, right?
Yeah.
And so the men are talking to the men, the women are talking to the women, but we're not talking to each other, and we're not, taking enough time to say, well, wait a minute, you are just, you may not intend to do it, but I and it's great to see a guy when they've had this experience, and when you kind of tap them on the shoulder,
Right.
and just see the transformation. And a lot of guys that I've been having these conversations with, I've seen real change. So I'm encouraged.
We definitely should be encouraged.
I'm encouraged.
And one of the things that I thought about when you're saying, again, there are all these diversity experts, right? All these big companies, and they're going into these companies. And what I love is this is kind of what we started with, this idea that in that vein, yes, we understand the racial issues, we understand these equity issues, and the thread in that still are these, sexism, all of these other things. A lot of times there are these great diversity experts talking to these great companies, and those companies have all white male leads, all white male execs, and it's like, okay, you're saying let's embrace this and have this conversation about race. Why aren't you having that cross conversation within your organization to say, we have a racial issue, we probably have a gender issue as well.
That was what was so frustrating, because companies were, over $50 billion was dedicated to social justice organizations. And not all of it has been paid, and a lot of it was in the form of home equity loans. But there was $50 billion pledged, over the last year or so after George Floyd's murder. But a lot of those same companies that pledged hundreds of millions of dollars, their internal structures were the worst.
Yeah,
they had the worst numbers in terms of women. They had the worst numbers in terms of, African Americans, Latinx, Asian, Americans, So they were going outward because that's the easy box to check. That's a good corporate citizen. They get their name on a building because they've donated, $5 million to some organization, and not that isn't good money, and not that nonprofits shouldn't take
but
money
it's not
from those
that
corporations.
Let's really look at what we're doing internally and be responsible internally, where it's like, okay, that's an action thing that you can do. Where are you really doing the work? Are you really doing the work within your own organization, within your own corporation, to say, again, if you have some racial issues, you probably have some gender issues. We were looking at these corporate structures, they go hand in hand. And so I think that, again, that's kind of what you started with. It's like we started thinking about it in that same vein of having this movement of Black Lives Matter, and then saying, wow, there's a lot of things that are built into these structural issues.
And as women of color, we get hit both ways by it, right? So
exactly. We're definitely at the cross section of both.
Yes, talk about intersectionality. We are, definitely impacted in so many ways by, there was a State of the Woman report that just came out in September, and the top headline was that women had made a lot of progress. When you dig into this report, more in depth, there is some progress, but I question, if there were 4 women, in a position, and now there's 6, that's a 30% increase. But you had 4 and now there's 6. So, and also when I looked into the study, even with greater depth, women had made some progress, like at the mid-management level.
Exactly.
Still, the numbers at senior level, C-suite level, was just woefully deficient. I think the number for women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies is like 41, and of that 41, 3 were women. 3 were women of 3 were Black women. 3 are Black women, and at any given time, that 3 can be 1. That 3 can be 0. And we've never really gotten past, that number. And again, when you look at the number of women, Black women in particular, that are graduating from college, and just the tremendous expertise that's out there, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah, because, you said this before, the numbers don't add up, right? The statistics are not there for you to support that on paper. We're doing all the things. So again, kind of, in wrapping up, like, how do you address that in the book overall? And not that you have the solution, but you have a lot of great ideas about things that we can do. And I want to make sure that you are able to, express some of those things where it's like, again, we know what it is. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. But I also know that you're very solution oriented and action oriented. So it's like, again, what can we say? What can we do? How can we continue this conversation? How can we, and again, not just talk about it, but actually do things.
Well, shameless plug, you could start by buying the book.
Absolutely, please buy the book.
Buy the book. Don't buy one copy, buy multiple copies.
Buy some for some men.
Buy some for the guys in your life, buy some for your male colleagues. And host an awakening party. Have a group of people over to your house, at your office, around a conference room, around a table, your kitchen table, and have these conversations. That's what I hope this book does. If it does nothing else, I hope it sparks. I want people to take those 5 lies. It's funny. I was doing an interview on a news show, and the guy said, "There are only 5 lies." He says, "I thought this book would be like 6,000 pages." I'm like, "Yeah, it should be, right. I agree with you." So
there's a lot of
what are the
that we
lies
have to
that
deal
you've been
with,
told?
right?
Yeah, I count the 5 that resonate with me, but that 5 could be 10, it could be 15, it could be any a greater number. So one thing I hope people do is reflect, what have they been told?
Yeah.
Both men and women, because men have been told a bunch of lies too about women, like we're inferior, like we can't lead, like there's we're not tough. It's not in our DNA. Those are a lot of lies and racist and sexist tropes that follow women, particularly women of color. And men have bought into those.
Yeah.
And a lot of men believe, we can see it in, jobs like firefighting and, police and jobs like that. Until very recently, women had to fight really hard in order to integrate, those jobs and to gain respect and positions. And that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And there's still lots of men who believe that women are just, by DNA inferior to men, cannot, live up to what men can do. So I hope that people get together and think about what they've been told and be willing to have an honest conversation about it, and be willing to challenge notions that they may have bought into for years. That's what process I went through. Women I interviewed, many of them have had to go through that process. And that's one of the things I hope the most, one of the big takeaways from the book.
Yeah, because we all have that moment, like you said, when it happens to you, some of us have multiple moments, but in that moment, to be able to say you're identifying it and awaken to it, that, okay, this is my moment to challenge it. This is my moment to use my voice.
And it's in the books we read, it's in the movies
it's in everything.
we watch,
It's so
it's in
implicit. It's
the
everything.
commercials, it's everywhere, and we find ourselves rooting for those characters, and we have to sometimes stop ourselves and say, wait a minute, that was sexist, that was misogynistic, that was racist, and we root for it. You know, we've been conditioned to accept it and to even cheer for it. So, you know, it won't happen overnight. You know, you can't unlearn what you have learned, you know, over years and some people decades, but you can. You know, you definitely can start to challenge some of those things that we have accepted.
Well, awesome. I have enjoyed this so much, Miss Areva.
Thank you. Me too.
I
Happy
really,
that.
really appreciate
Have
your
an
time.
awakening party
tonight.
with
We'll definitely need an awakening party with some Ramona wine spritzers.
Absolutely.
You know, in the right context, we can enjoy that.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Again, is there anything that you want to leave us with? I want to make sure, of course, plug the book. I already pre-ordered mine. You said, what is the publication date? The 26th?
October 26th. Yes, I'm super excited. I'm going to be headed to New York over the weekend on Sunday. I go to New York. I do a couple of events in New York. I'm going to do one at the Harlem School of Arts up in Harlem. I'm going to do one in the Meatpacking District with Alice and Olivia, which is kind of the ultimate female clothing brand. And then I'm going to do some, you know, on-camera media around the book. But because of COVID, not the traditional, you know, book events that you would do, but I'm excited, you know, going into being able to meet some people in person, talk to some women. The event I'm doing up in Harlem is kind of in conjunction with Columbia Law School, and I've invited a lot of the law students. So really want to start having these conversations with younger women and men who are just, you know, embarking upon their, not even starting their legal career, but getting their legal training. So excited about that. Then I'm going to go to St. Louis and do a couple of events, which is my hometown. So I'm do a couple of events here in LA in person. So I'm excited, a little different. Like I said, doing a book tour at COVID, a lot of online events, a lot of Zooms like this, which I'm grateful for. But I'm just grateful for the opportunity to, you know, share this hour with Langston and Black women's lawyers, and thank you for inviting me and having me. Just keep doing the great work you're doing. My two daughters actually are at Columbia.
They're both in law school, right?
Yes, so they'll be coming home to LA and you know, getting involved in the, you know, the Black Bar Associations here in town. So I'm excited.
Oh, awesome. Well, again, thank you. I thought it was important, again, because of this conversation that, you know, that we were, like I mentioned before we started, not just in two boxes, that we were really here and be able to have this conversation. I thank you so much for your time. I think this is very valuable. And I think, you know, beyond buying the book, if you don't already, please follow Areva on social media, because you are always sharing great tidbits and information. And you can also find out more about all the appearances and where and when Areva's going to be talking on TV, in person, all of those places. And I think you're Areva Martin everywhere on all platforms.
I am. Thank you for reminding me of that. And also, I have this new job. You know, I pride myself.
You got another job. You're like me. But now, what have you taken on now that you want to share?
KBLA 1580. So I'm hosting a radio show on the weekend called Areva Martin Out Loud.
Excellent.
And I've been talking to some, just started 2 weeks ago. This Saturday, I'm going to be talking to Lunel and a couple of Black media experts. We're talking about, you know, just some of the horrific things that people from DaBaby have said about, you know, his homophobic remarks about Lil Nas X. We're talking about the ESPN host Stacey, who felt it's her business to talk about Stash. Her name is Stash, right?
No, Sage.
Sage
right.
Steele.
Sage
Steele, you're right. Found it her business to worry about why Obama was
identifying himself.
Like, okay, so talk about that. You know, just having conscious conversations.
That's what I said. I appreciate you so much because you have such an amazing voice, but such an important voice. And here's another outlet I see for you to be able to have conversations about important topics.
Oh, I got to do a big shout out to the Mert Park Book Fair. I got to tell you this real quick story.
Oh, absolutely.
So the Mert Park Book Fair this Saturday, online, virtual, because people can't gather because of COVID. It's 10 to 5. I'm the ambassador for the Mert Park Book Fair.
Awesome.
So I got to rep the book fair. So 12 years ago or so, I wrote my first book. It was self-published. It's called Journey to the Top.
Yeah.
You cannot get into most book fairs with a self-published book, except if it's a Black book fair, and they welcome their own. So they had a tent for all of us first time, writers, self-published folks, and we're like in the back, in our little tent by ourselves. Nobody's visiting us. Nobody wants to talk to us, right? All the big name authors, they had a stage. So all the big name authors were, on the stage getting interviewed. Everybody's following you around once they're, autograph, and we're just back there like, wow, it's gonna be us.
Exactly.
It's gonna be us. So full circle experience. Here I am 12 years later, my 4th book, and I'm the ambassador for the book fair. So I've made it to the big stage. So
I love that. Well,
I say that to
congratulations
say,
on that.
don't give up on your dream, plan it, dream it, and work it. Because I started in the back, and now I'm the ambassador for the book fair. So, and I just love the Lamert Park Book Fair because of that, because they embrace. Obviously, Dick Giovanni's going to be a part of the book fair this time. So they have big name authors like her, but they also embrace people like me who just had a little dream that I want to write a book. So, they make space for all of us. Yeah. So big shout out to them and the work they're doing. So if anybody's out there thinking about writing a book, do it. Just do it.
Well, that's great advice about anything, right? If you're thinking about writing a book, again, I didn't write a book during COVID, but I'm glad that you did, because now we have this and we have this conversation. And again, I want to thank you so much for this time. Even though it is COVID, I know you have a lot of things going on, and I appreciate it because we do feel like you are part of our family as a Black woman, as an attorney, and again, as literally as a Langston honoree. So we're always happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening.